Welcome to this week's episode of Surgeon Interrupted. I am truly jazzed this week to welcome the dancing Eurodoc, Maheetha, the internet's favorite urologist, if I may say.
I really appreciate that introduction. I will say that I'm probably one of the internet's first dancing urologists. I will give you that.
100%. I mean, I've been mesmerized by your dancing for a long time, for many years now. I think that even further though, so for instance, I think that I know that I don't speak the language of dance. I have personally not been a very skilled dancer myself. Like, that's not body movement is probably like not one of the intelligences that I have. But your Kardashian skits did make me laugh out loud. And I was like, wow, God does give with both hands. I feel like that's the conclusion that I kind of came to when I got to meet you early on.
Well, thank you so much, and that's a really great segue into kind of how I approach folks who say, "Oh my God, I know you from somewhere." Because the first question I ask them is, "What flavor of my content reaches you?" And I've always been somebody who has like multiple interests and passions, and I can't choose one. And this is also something that goes into like sort of how I function on TikTok versus how I feel like I've grown on Instagram is a little different because TikTok
Mhm.
kind of expects you to be this like one trick pony. Um, but on Instagram, it's like a good video, regardless of what is in that video and what content is in that video. A good video will go viral. It doesn't have to be your usual takes or your usual content. This was very, and this is actually what encouraged me to keep posting sort of diverse types of content on Instagram. So I do some education, I do dancing skits, I do Kardashian skits. And so it's always nice when there is actually a spread. Like some people are like, no, I actually came for your Foley catheter content. And then other people are like, oh, no, it's your Kardashian skits. And some people are like, oh, it's your dancing skits. And then a lot of people are like, well, actually, I stayed for the advocacy. So I think that's what's kind of the goal is to draw people in with like fun content, but really the content that I want them to stay for is my advocacy.
Oh my gosh. No, I love that so much. And I think that that is a perfect segue to something that we really do want to dig into today, which is your advocacy, both, like in real life, IRL, social media, all of it. I think that one phrase that I use pretty often, I feel like I use this, I don't know, in business sometimes, certainly maybe social media relevant, which is like putting the medicine in the cheese for
Mm.
the dog, like we have to do that for my dog. We have to do
Mhm.
that. Like, think of the old Trojan horse tales, right? Like all of
Mhm.
that lore. This concept of we kind of like package an important critical message or some kind of like advocacy mission-based work, and we package it palatably
Yeah.
for people, or the medicine in the cheese, if you will.
Yeah.
Um, I guess my question would be, yeah, does that resonate at all? Do you feel like that's almost a way to conceptualize it?
It does, and I've experimented with this a lot. For example, recently I did a Kardashian skit with Dr. Bright Joe, like the Gen Z attending,
Mhm.
and you had them on recently, your podcast, and with them, I created this Kardashian skit about PSA screening. And then underneath that Kardashian skit in the comments would be secondary reels that are more serious conversations about PSA screening, guidelines, PSAs in Black patients, and why advocacy is important. And so that was a way of experimenting like, okay, here is a message that we're giving to you in a funny way, but also kind of coupled with messaging that is more serious. So that is one way of doing it.
And
Another
how do
way,
you feel like that was received? Like, because I
I think
love
it was
that. I love
received
the layers.
I think it was received very well. And it's not just with PSA screening, for example, that I do that. There are other collaborations that I've done that are truly with the intent of making it educational in some way. Even one of my earlier skits with Dr. I'm just gonna say Dr. Brooke, but her Instagram handle is live laugh xlap, and with her, it was a general surgery versus urology one, and many people in the comments were like, "What's?" I didn't know what a Fournier's gangrene was until now, and I'm like, "Okay, yeah, these skits are actually very educational." Plenty of people comment like, "I wish this could count for CME credits," and I was like, honestly. Yeah, maybe we can explore something there. So it's not the first time that I have kind of experienced. This is more kind of explicit experimenting with like bringing in people with the comedy,
Mhm.
having them stay
Mhm.
for the education. And I think that's actually a very win-win combination because most of the content creators that are really famous and popular and do educational work do build in some form of humor and education. And I do think that works well. It's something that I think about a lot in terms of how I want to have my impact.
That is absolutely incredible, and yes, shout out, I love Bright. They were killing me, I think our podcast episode together wasn't even as funny as much as it was, like, very wise, very prescient, just love them, and then Brooke is also, like, a phenom. I
Yeah.
think what I love about her, in addition to a lot of, like, the educational content, it's kind of like, um I mean, I'm not reducing it to Sex and the City. I love Sex and the City. So when I think of her as being, like, this really brilliant woman who lives in Chicago's, is single at this age, early 30s, living in Chicago single in a dream apartment and, like, dating,
Mhm.
that's amazing. That's
Yeah.
living the dream in many ways, and
And
I
she's a
love.
surgeon. Like yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and not apologetic about any of it, like, obviously I mean, I feel like some of us take that for granted, though, like,
Absolutely.
that concept of a woman shrinking herself for a man is actually so foreign to me that I forget that anybody is doing that, and then if I see
Yeah.
someone doing that, I wanna smack their hand and be like,
Yeah.
"Don't do that."
Yeah. And I think I recently went to the Society for Women in Urology conference in Nashville. And that was a very different kind of conference because many of the talks were not necessarily about urology. It was about career, life, moving through a surgical field as a woman. And all of this resonated where everyone in that room was at some point made to feel that they needed to dim their shine because they were seen as a threat just because they were confident or just because they were right, And so I think that um that still happens, that concept that you have to kind of make yourself smaller. You have to maneuver through these places and these systems very, very differently because you're a woman. That still exists for sure.
Yeah, I think women in medicine also minorities, just this
Absolutely.
idea of the hidden curriculum in medicine, because what's crazy, even when you talk about the conferences,
Hmm.
all these years later I really can't think of any doctors off the top of my head where it was the material book learning, where it was anatomy, where pathophysiology was the thing that, like, got them in the end, like, gave them a
Yeah.
lot of heartache, trouble,
Yeah.
lost sleep over. No, I
No.
really don't, and that's not to
No.
say we all have concepts that are, like, harder for us to grasp, like, I'm not embarrassed, I'll say ears, the middle ear, the inner ear were a black box for me for a long time. And even at my best, I was like, "Okay, I don't like you." But that was never the thing that, like, caused real turmoil, caused real setbacks and
Absolutely.
heartbreak. It is
Absolutely.
everything else you just alluded to. That's why I'm
Absolutely.
glad people talk about it at conferences more.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all know that the hidden curriculum, there's layers to it, right? Like there's being a woman, but then there's also the intersectionality of being a woman and an underrepresented minority, a woman and queer, right? And a woman and their first generation in medicine. And so I think we definitely need to talk more about what that intersectionality means and discussing how the intersectionality actually um, plays out in residency. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It just, um, I think that this is not unique to me, but I had like a really, like a neurodivergent level of sense of justice, right?
Mhm.
So for people who are naive going into training, which a lot of us
Mhm.
are, I was young and I did not have real world experience. And so the fallacy of fairness, everything should be fair. I mean, sometimes you wake up and you look around, your workplace, and it's like it could actually cause some kind of like implosion of the mind,
Yeah.
the degree of unfairness that we witness. But of course, we're seeing that, I think, break down at every level because, of course, there's the workplace,
Yeah.
there's society,
Yeah.
there's, the national kind of events. I guess that one thing that I want to call out before we move into a deeper dive of like the advocacy piece
Yeah.
is just when I think of your content, I love it. You're a master at putting the medicine in the cheese.
Mm.
We can call that. People need the medicine. That's like
Mhm.
this is a very
Mhm.
important and skillful task that you do. But when I think of your Foley catheter
Mhm.
content, because yes, definitely, like I love the Kardashian, I love your dances. I
Mhm.
just don't. I feel like I'm like, wow, my body cannot do that. Like that's crazy. But whereas, I love the Kardashians, the Foley catheter content.
Mhm.
I love this idea of destigmatization,
Mhm.
normalization of these things by laying it all on the court. And frankly, if I had to have like an indwelling Foley catheter or something like that, right now, if I was walking around with that, seeing your videos
Mhm.
of you dancing with the Foley, they would make me feel better and they'd make me feel seen.
I really appreciate that, and I think that that is a sentiment that is also shared by quite a few people who comment. Some of them saying, "Hey, I wish there was somebody at my hospital that could have explained this to me the way that you did because now I kind of really understand it." Just it just makes me really sad about what healthcare has done to the doctor-patient relationship, really. And that's actually where some of my more recent advocacy has been at the state capitol. And also, I'm going to go to DC later this month to kind of advocate for my patients in that way. But it just really makes me think of what, this healthcare system, what capitalism has done to the doctor-patient relationship that a patient with a catheter is just like, "Nobody explained this to me," and how we can use social media to kind of reclaim that relationship and have a better relationship with our patients, where patients don't feel like, left behind or misled by the physician community and as well more broadly the healthcare worker community. And so I think that's kind of one of the pearls that I've learned from what I've been doing education wise on social media.
That's incredible. And I think that this hits on uh something that fascinates me that I was recently struck by, which is that the advocacy, any amount that we look out for one another in healthcare, any amount that we're looking out for our patients, everything like that, it's so, so important. What's crazy is I think of that old quote, which is like, if a tree falls in a forest and no one hears it, right? Like, did the tree fall? And I want to give a concrete example and kind of get your thoughts. Here's something that happened to me recently. One of my actually very good friends is a physician in her, in probably later career would be fair.
Mhm.
Okay, so a late career physician. She's amazing. We actually have a friendship in part just like not related to medicine. So we just hang out, we do various, we just chill. However, in medicine, I do think that sometimes there's this generational sense of like older physicians left younger physicians out to dry.
Mm.
And I mean that just systemically. I
Mhm.
mean increasingly selling their private practices to private equity
Mm.
by never organizing, certainly by never unionizing, never organizing,
Mm.
allowing power to be siphoned away in,
Mhm.
at times, droves out
Mhm.
to like other players, admin,
Mhm.
insurance, right? Just like the physician experience is so, so different right
Mhm.
now compared to what it was 20, certainly 30 years ago.
Mhm.
Um, and in part, it almost feels like at times, I'm just describing like a gestalt I've had, which is like those older physicians did not enormously care about what happened to future generations of physicians. Another
Mm.
example of this that I'll use is that when I graduated from residency and shared with a couple different mentors, hey, this is what happened, I'm out now. This is what happened over the past few years. From so many people, dozens of people, and these were old mentors, they were shocked and they were like, whoa, it was that way when I trained. I thought they had cleaned that up.
Mhm.
That broke my heart every time I heard it. Super unhelpful. It's like, oh, so people knew it was this
Mm.
way. They
Right.
assumed somebody else would take care of it. Nobody took care of it, and it's still happening.
Yeah, but I mean, I
That
guess why would you think things would change if nothing happens.
Well, right, exactly. It's that bystander effect. Like, I'm sure someone's taking care of this. I'm just gonna like
Yeah.
move on. That kills me. But anyway, to go back to my friend, she's incredible. She sits on the board of her old medical school. And again, like later career, so has a lot of resources. She and her entire, like that crew, they have been working to try to make medical school free there at that school
Mm,
for years now.
mm,
And I know they actually sponsor a few spots. Like people will, like literally
mhm,
alumni, these older doctors, they'll pay for like a couple medical school seats.
mhm,
But they're even like, why stop there?
mhm,
What if we made medical school free here? If all of us like pitched into a special endowment,
mhm.
like this is an active thing that they're working on. And that gave me chills. I was like, that's beyond incredible. I had no idea. And also, nobody has any idea because this is a crew of a
Mhm,
very insular, way older group of physicians, right?
mhm,
But that's incredible. Just even the fact that they sponsor a few spots, awesome. The fact
mhm,
that they care enough to be doing years of work
mhm.
on litigating a whole medical school, isn't that remarkable? But I guess my question is, I think it's so important that people know and see that. I feel like me, even as a young person now, I'm like, that is a feel good story, and we need to kind of connect the dots more. Like, I think young people would love to hear that story.
Absolutely. Yeah. I agree, and there's something to be said about visibility too, and how visibility of one person maybe doing this gives other people ideas.
Yes.
It gives them hope, and it gives them the freedom to also think similarly and maybe say, hey, maybe we can do this too. That is the whole point of visibility, right? That's the whole point of being like a visible women in urology, right, on the internet, is because when I went to the Society for Women in Urology National Conference, 3 medical students came up to me and said, I didn't know what urology was. I didn't think it was for me. And then I saw you, and people sent me your TikToks and your Instagrams. And now I'm like, huh, why couldn't it be me? And now here I am at this conference presenting work in urology. So people underestimate the power of visibility. And that's not only for just representation in medicine or ideas on how to advocate for change within medicine. It's also advocacy for patients. And when you talk about, injustices, when you talk about like, hey, as a doctor, I don't feel like this is appropriate. I don't feel like this is right. I feel like this is harming my patients. That also gives other doctors and other people the power and permission, really, it's permission to think that way as well, out loud. I think that's powerful.
So beautifully said. The permission piece, yes, I think is huge. The visibility piece, um, I have always felt that way, and I'll use the example of I know you and I were talking about before, like Dr. Laura Botter, she's
Mhm,
doing a lot in terms of sleep
mhm,
reform, advocacy about the dangerous effects of sleep deprivation.
mhm,
And what's amazing though is that she, not only as a resident, but then again as a HEMONC fellow,
mhm,
did suffer extreme sleep deprivation. She's
mhm,
spoken about this, to at one point being awake for like 60 hours in the hospital, starting to hallucinate on the
mhm,
walls of the emergency room.
mhm,
She herself did tons of research,
mhm,
collected the full, like all the literature out there. She just gave a big TEDx talk about this.
mhm,
But essentially, she was able to go to administration and say, here's all the evidence out there about how
mhm.
dangerous this is. Here is my detailed log of what 1 week on call looked like. I logged every phone call.
Yeah.
Look at this amount of work, and then what can we do to change this? And that's really remarkable. But the amazing thing about her sharing all these resources is that we're just packaging them up to
Mhm,
say, you can take this into a conversation with your PD. I honestly had a very like nice, reasonable person was my PD.
yeah.
I do feel like half the time that we couldn't get anywhere and couldn't like make any progress was kind of
Mhm,
because we would say, what was supposed to be Q5 call is now permanently Q3 call because of these missing trainees. So, what can be done about that? Can we bring in a locums person? Could the fellow take call? Could
mhm.
an attending take call? What can be done? It was always met with like, no, like the answer is just no, we can't do any of that stuff. Nobody
Yeah.
does any of that stuff. It just doesn't happen. Whereas the second that you can take a firsthand account from modern training, Stanford did this. Stanford was able to make this leave of
Mhm.
absence occur for a
Yeah.
resident who needed it.
Yeah.
That's literally I would just print it out, and if I could go back in time, I'd print this out, I'd slide it across the table, I'd be like, "I'm not saying that this exact thing will work here, totally understand. Our department's a different size than that department. But what's the middle path?" So that's, I think, to your point about visibility and just, but I love this blueprint, like how I did it, and that's not prescriptive.
Mhm.
It's just an idea. It's just, and it further, the how I did it also means feel free to improve upon this.
Mhm.
This is
Mhm.
never the end all, not any
Yeah.
one of us has the final answers, but I think that the lack of resource sharing
Yeah.
that happens, like,
Yeah.
especially, like surgeons they can be competitive and
Mhm.
cutthroat, not
Yeah.
collaborative, because it's like, if I win, somebody else has to lose. I'm not going to openly share
Right, it's not a
information
zero-sum
across.
game here.
I know, but I guess my question is, it does feel, having come up in the surgery system, right? Like, it did feel like a zero sum game. And so my question is, how do we change that? How would you convince someone that it isn't? You can model some different behavior, but what else can we do?
That's a really good question, and I think that some fundamental changes to the way that we approach medicine and medical training has to happen. I don't have a great answer for that, but I also think that on social media, positive content has always been received better and well, and collaborative content, like saying, "Hey, I'm going to support and uplift each other." I do appreciate that. I see that in the younger generations, even kind of like, I would say, I like to say zillennial um, generations on there, that we are all about like collaborative. How can we help each other out? How can we um, make sure that everyone is winning? And I hope that it's kind of like visibility, right? When people see that you can actually be collaborative and supportive and still win, then maybe that will strike some change and in attitudes from people who may not have thought that. And that's kind of the simplest basic solution I have. But I do think that to like really uproot this sort of dog eat dog nature, there has to be a lot of changes that come from up above, right? The way that our system is designed, right? The way that our, like, we just need more doctors. We really do. We need more doctors. We need to make more spots for doctors. Like, these are all things that changes won't happen overnight. But even within the system that we have right now, it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be a dog eat dog world. Um, there's, it's, I think, really refreshing sometimes to hear that a place where this kind of dog eat dog idea is sort of hyper focused is truly in academic medicine, right? And when you go into medicine, all you know is academic medicine, because the med school that you
Yeah.
go to,
Yeah.
when you do pre-med, you're like interfacing with academic people. When you do med school, you're interfacing with academic people, and then when you do residency, it's academics, um, and then when you do fellowship, it's academics, and then after that, you're like, oh, 80% of our field is actually in private practice. And then you're like, oh, like this is where there's like more, like, private practice is more freedom. There's just like, you do the work, you get the pay. Like, it's very, you're not trying to compete for like spots over and over again. It's different,
Right. Or
it's
going from like associate to assistant, or whichever
right,
direction that goes in, assistant to
right.
associate. I
So,
don't even know. You can't even tell by the
exactly,
name itself. And people will
exactly.
toil and put these
Yeah.
packets together.
And I think another thing that social media has really opened my eyes to is that success can take many different shapes and forms, right? So part of this is the visibility of not having examples of what supportive culture looks like, and how that actually leads to a win for everybody, right? Not having examples of that. If you're just isolated in this place that, thinks exactly like this dog eat dog world, it's really hard to tap into what it could look like. So that's one thing. Visibility is one thing, but also internally changing definitions of what success means. Because when you go into pre-med and medicine, your definition of success is always, I'm going to go to academic medicine. I'm going to do something in academic medicine plus. And like me personally, I do kind of like academic medicine, but it's not necessarily for everyone. And making sure that your definition of success does not have to be in this confined definition within the framework of academic medicine, right? And I think that will also eliminate the internal pressure of needing to be in this dog eat dog situation as well. So just having examples of all of that, I think social media has also opened my eyes to that because I see a lot of really cool doctors doing really cool things that are not necessarily in academic medicine. And I think that has allowed me, again, given me permission to think about what my career could look like, even within academic medicine or outside of academic medicine. So,
Totally. Yeah, I've seen some really cool hybrid
mhm.
academic and
Yes.
diverse careers that are
Yes.
like, yeah, never knew that that existed. And frankly, it probably didn't exist when we were growing up, but
Yes.
people have carved it out now. Um I love this. I agree with you that this concept of really just like modeling behavior though. I think part of it is like the visibility, and if you show that people can collaborate and win, then eventually that trickles down. But I also agree with you that it starts at the top. You know,
It
I had
does.
some our co-residents always used to say, yeah, it's a top-down culture and
Absolutely. We just had this discussion at our regional urology conference just about a month ago about like who sets the culture, right? And like, yes, your co-residents set the culture, but there's different levels to it, right? Your co-residents set the day-to-day culture, your attendings set like the monthly culture because you rotate at different hospitals and you work with different attendings. And then the chair and the program director set the culture for your entire residency, right? And so it's different levels of importance. But I made a point to say it's really hard for residents to set a good culture if from top down there is pressure to not have that kind of culture, right? If top down there is toxicity or there's this idea where people, attendings or program chairs are trying to pit residents against each other or make it like an environment where like if this resident wins then this resident loses, right? If they're trying to have that kind of environment, then the residents themselves can only do so much to have a supportive culture. So I think I completely agree with you that it is top down, and I do think that the top, in my opinion, is a little bit more important than kind of the day to day.
I love it. I think that it does invite I wanna play devil's
Yeah.
advocate, which is just to say that if residents banded together,
Yeah.
dare I say organized, dare I say unionized, then they're gonna have more bargaining power than certainly any one resident alone.
Mhm.
It's very hard to, yes, change
Absolutely.
the at-large culture. I want to share this thought, which is conversely, okay, let's say that the top-down I'm thinking of a specific ENT program where the chair is, like, famously the nicest guy ever. Like, I heard
Mhm.
rumors of his niceness were, like, famous even when I was in a different state for medical school. People always
Yeah.
were like, "Really could not say a mean thing about this guy."
Mhm.
When I interviewed there, I
Mhm.
remember the attendings were young. They seemed happy, they were light, they were
Mhm.
real, like, it was actually a at large, it was one of just the interview days where, like, in general, even the attendings seemed lighter, as
Mhm.
in the attendings didn't seem totally,
Mhm.
crushed. Their souls
Yeah.
weren't totally crushed by the job, and I think that even if a resident wanted to act out, behave poorly, behave
Mhm.
unprofessionally, bully people, that would be frowned upon, right? It's almost like we just need like the momentum and the quorum to be, because if it's an environment where literally top down, we're going to be nice, we're going to be professional. We do not accept it. If you want to do some toxic stuff, we don't like that. That's also why, yeah, like I'm not in academia, but I have even more freedom as a person who wasn't attending when I came out and I said, "Bring back embarrassment." People who want to act toxic and bully and belittle and just, like, make everyone else feel small, that's embarrassing for you. And I don't mind, like, I'm in a unique position where I can say that. That is my opinion. It was my opinion back then. I couldn't say it. Um,
Mm. Yeah.
I do really believe that to be true, and imagine if a few years from now, like, that kind of change takes effect, then it is kind of like, okay, even if you want to be cutthroat, you keep that to yourself. It's not acceptable in the workplace. People are going to um, think less of you for that. They won't make excuses for you and they won't be like, we love it. Keep bragging about how much you make people cry at work.
Yeah. I do think that one thing I think does need to change in academic medicine, but also everywhere is it's just that there is no consequence for being a toxic person. There really is. Even today, there is no consequence for being a someone who and I think that people want to say, "Oh my god, this is a slippery slope." And I'm like, I think in general people can tell somebody who just is a little anxious in the OR versus someone who has a consistent pattern of belittling people and making residents cry. And in residency, you don't get taught how to be a good leader. You don't get taught how to run a team and interface with people who are now you have to delegate tasks and interface with people who are junior residents, and nobody teaches you how to do that. We just expect that you understand how to do that and that you will eventually learn that. But in the end, there are examples that I can think of, countless stories from colleagues too about people who were just mean and horrible, and they just never were told, and um, they were never reprimanded for that kind of behavior. And then now they're going to go out into the community and continue to be that way and continue to harass medical students and be toxic. And I think that's a problem, and that's a problem that needs to be fixed.
Agreed. I fully agree. I think that, and I know this is going to be a hard question. This is like a cosmic philosophical question, but I feel like, you know, we're talking about there's a lot of innate unfairness built into the system because that's how I would describe it. Like, yes, unchecked malignancy
Hmm.
in a personality in a program, like there aren't really consequences for that. I find that unfair. I
Yeah.
like until residency, I did not know that you could say whatever you want and lie about people and make
Yeah.
them cry at work.
Yeah.
And that's just like
Yeah.
totally okay. There are not consequences for that. That
Yeah.
is what I had a really particularly hard time with.
Yeah.
Um, but especially at a time
Yeah.
where we know that in the world at large, there's also that extraordinary, like beyond the pale, heartbreaking unfairness. I guess my question is just like, how do you deal with it on days when it feels oppressively crushing? How do
Hmm.
you deal with you're advocating on so many different layers? You advocate for your patients, you advocate for other physicians, you advocate for the people of Minnesota, right?
Hmm.
Stuck in Minneapolis right now. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
there's so much more globally,
Yeah.
internationally that's happening that
Yeah.
you advocate for. And so, how do you, let it all not absolutely crush you up? And I mean, what advice do you have for others who also feel like they're trying to juggle all that?
It's really hard, Francis, and I will tell you that a lot of other content creators who have been vocal about issues that affect our patients, because everything comes back to our patients, right? One angle that I've learned to take is more like, how can I talk about these issues that from a doctor's perspective, this is hurting my patients, right? This is hurting the people that I take care of, right? What's happening in Minneapolis, Minnesota is hurting patients, not just patients who are being directly affected by, federal agents, but it truly like everybody in the city, right? The stress that this causes folks that lead to epigenetic changes later on, the trauma that this causes for folks, especially children not being able to go to school, right? People not being able to come to the hospitals. It doesn't matter who you are, right? Like all of this is affecting our patients. And so trying to have a patient-centered angle, a healthcare-centered angle, um, kind of it goes in hand in hand, and I hate to do that, but it goes hand in hand with putting the medicine in the cheese, because
Mhm.
people
Mhm.
are more likely to say, "Oh my god, a doctor is worried about her patients," than angry woman of color on the internet,
Yeah,
right?
like a
Like,
civilian thinks that crimes
right,
against humanity are being committed, but which
right.
should be enough, but I
Which
agree with you,
should
like,
be enough, right? But, this is the privilege that you have with the doctor MD platform, is to say, wow, like this is a doctor, right, who is talking about, and this is the angle that many other healthcare professionals try to take. And it's sad because there are things that I do want to say that are more pointed, but I have to be very careful because guess what? My Instagram stories are being actively censored and suppressed because I look at my story counts and I look at my story numbers, and I used to have, before everything that recently happened in Minnesota, I used to have, even for a lot of the advocacy content, my stories would at least have 1,000 to 1,500 views in a
Mhm.
24-hour period. And now
Mhm.
consistently, every single story that I post has only 200 to 300 views. And if you look at who they're only reaching my followers. They're not reaching new people. They're not, and that's the whole point, right? You want your stories to reach new people, so you're not just screaming
Right.
into this echo chamber.
Right.
So it is very, very demoralizing, right? And I actually just recently made a video about how in amidst this demoralization, right, my pain is nothing compared to the people who are actively suffering in places where these atrocities are happening. And the least that I can do is diversify my advocacy, right? Social media was a tool that I still think is a useful advocacy tool, but something like going to the state capitol, calling your
Mhm.
representatives and senators, these are things that everybody can do. Donations, mutual aids, diversifying your advocacy is a way that I stay strong, and that I think the advocacy community needs to stay strong. We cannot get into this burnout and then stop advocating,
Mhm.
right? We don't have time or space for that.
Mhm.
This is where our efforts are truly needed. And and I think it's important. And I felt very invigorated when I went to our state capitol
Mm.
earlier this month and I spoke to um, both Democratic and Republican senators and representatives about pre-authorization and all these issues that affect our patients. And honestly, I was very surprised to see how many of the issues actually have bipartisan support, because what matters is patients, right?
Mhm.
Everybody's been a
Yeah.
patient, everybody knows a
Yep.
patient, everybody's been to the hospital, everybody's needed a primary care physician. And so I do find that patient-centric angle really does help. I think it's sad that that is what we have to do to make things palatable. I really do. And it doesn't take away from the gravity of other issues and being direct about it. But that's kind of how I've tried to avoid advocacy burnout, as I'd like to say.
Mm. Incredibly helpful. I mean, you just really taught me something right there, that it makes perfect sense. Um, I think that in my 30s, this question I have to ask myself all the time, and the answer's different now, is would you rather be right or would you rather be effective? And so what
Mm,
I mean by that is that, of course, I agree with you. Like, I would, I don't feel like somebody has to pull the doctor card to be like, hey, I think this is not
absolutely.
acceptable. I think that this
Absolutely.
is wrong. I think this is wrong. I think this is illegal. Like,
Hmm.
we don't, but I do believe in being effective. It's kind of like, to your point too, like, also, I would imagine advocacy burnout is a way higher risk for someone who is always like, they're not looking at the strategy and the effectiveness. They're just like, I'm going to clearly point out what's right and wrong every day. But like, yeah, it just, unfortunately, we live in a world where I'm learning to ask this question of like, well, is the message landing? And if the message is not landing, should I beat my head against a wall for 100 days in a row? Or is there a good middle path on the messaging? Like, you have such a great, um, I don't want to call it a spin zone, but it's a specific tack. It's
Hmm.
a specific, I do think medicine in the cheese, we'll call this episode
Yes.
medicine in the
That's in
cheese.
the cheese. No, I think that's a great metaphor that you have, Francis, truly. And I think that is what needs to happen and what has been happening for a long time. Uh, it's sad that that is, you know, that is the tactic that seems to be working a lot. I wish I could be just direct and straightforward, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Cause like, I mean, I do view you that way. I don't primarily view you as a doctor, so I'm more like Maheetha, the young, highly intelligent woman. Like, I am here for that, but of course, like, I'm biased because I do think that young women of color, I'm like, "Oh, we should extra
Yeah.
listen to them." Like,
Yeah,
"Everyone shut
absolutely.
up."
Yeah, and then another thing is like how does allyship come into this too, right? Like I specifically, for example, made a video about Keith Porter, who people have forgotten, but you know, was an innocent man, unfortunately, um, you know, lost his life in all of this. That is not being talked about, right? And that's kind of where it's like I do want to balance between, yes, doing advocacy, but also uplifting those voices that are very, very marginalized and who are probably being most affected by all of what's going on.
Absolutely. Well, truly, thank you for all that you do, and I think that a lot of us, are inspired by and kind of can learn from this. You definitely I applaud even just at a very superficial level. I applaud your energy because it is not easy to be a resident and take call and I know you have in addition to all of your incredible national international work, it's like you have research. I mean, you have
Yep,
duties at the job that you work full time. So,
absolutely.
I applaud you. I want some of whatever coffee you drink. But thank you so much for being here.
I appreciate being on here and being able to talk about this. And thank you for giving me this platform to do that, Francis. I appreciate it.
100%. And yeah, seriously, before we head out, our artist in residence at the Hippocratic Collective, everyone, obviously, like we chose correctly. What resources we have, we're under a year old, but we do want to put our resources behind this type of like mission aligned work. And so love to love to see you succeed and be like a tiny part of that journey.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for supporting my dreams and something that I've been wanting to do for a long time. And advocacy comes in many shapes and forms. And I'm always a believer in this. Yes, social media, yes, direct in person, but advocacy also comes in art. I think using art as a huge form of advocacy, some of the most powerful advocacy movements have always been through art. And starting all the way from, hip hop, right? And if we think about that, hip hop was, yes, it's music, but it's also advocacy. It's also resistance. It's also used as a platform and a tool to be able to speak out on injustices. And so I think that art has always been a modality for expression, but also advocacy. And so I think all of this ties in really, really well. And I'm really excited to show you guys the final product.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Look out for Maheetha's final choreographed dance. We're going to be spreading it far and wide once this is live.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Surgeon Interrupted. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and leave a review. In the meantime, check out our shows and other content at hippocratic-collective.com. Until next week, consider any ways in which you may be able to put the medicine in the cheese and help others in your life.